Yeah. Question to the Prime Minister. Is it his policy to, quote, muddle through, close quote, the current economic uncertainty?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Speaker, no, the government has actively taken a number of steps to ensure New Zealand can minimise any fallout from global economic events. For example, we've set a faster track back to surplus and we've limited debt to under 30% of GDP. We've front-loaded our borrowing program during the favourable market conditions, which will cover the government's obligations over coming months should markets show signs of tightening. And the Reserve Bank has ensured that it can supply temporary liquidity to sound institutions. That doesn't mean we are immune to any global events, but we are certainly in a lot better shape than those that we inherited from that hatless Labor government 3 years ago.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
If the answer to the primary question was no, it is not his plan, does he then agree with the sentiments that he ascribed to his Minister of Finance this morning, that it is sufficient for New Zealand to muddle through the current economic turbulence, or does he aspire to a better plan?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I've never said the words in the quote that the members just said. In fact, I have the quote in front of me. And the question from Rachel Smalley was, do you believe a double-dip recession is on the horizon? To which I said, while the atmosphere and the mood is very dark in the United States, by the way, that's the place where the President has Camp David as a retreat, and in Europe, that we might just muddle through. We being the world, not New Zealand.
The Honourable David Cunliffe. Order. Is this a point of order?
Yes, Mr Speaker.
Order. A point of order has been called. Order. The Honourable David Cunliffe, point of order.
I seek leave to table a transcript of the Prime Minister's response to that question from TV3's first line.
We don't table transcripts from
print
TV
media,
shows.
But transcripts are not necessarily available.
Order. Does the member have a supplementary question?
Yes, Mr
The Honourable
Speaker.
David Cunliffe.
To the Prime Minister, does he recall the Minister of Finance giving a speech in 2009 wherein he said, quote, "We want to do better than just muddle through," close quote. And 2 years later on, with growth of just 0.1% and 47,000 more people out of work than when he came to office, isn't it time he delivered on this aspiration?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, yes, I do recall that speech. And what I would say is, notwithstanding the earthquakes which have taken place in Christchurch, which have clearly had an impact on the economy, we've grown at 1% for the first half of this year. The OECD average has been 0.3% for the first quarter and 0.2% for the second quarter. It might be worth just thinking about what those quarters looked like in 2008. March was minus 0.2, June was minus 0.6, September was minus 0.6 and December was minus 1.2. That's a remarkable step up from that hatless Labor government.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Point of order, Mr Speaker.
Point of order, the Honourable David Cunliffe.
May assist the Prime Minister's memory if I were to table this graph of GDP statistics which show the change in trend since he took office.
Order, what's the source of the document?
Statistics New Zealand and the Parliamentary Library, Mr Speaker.
Prepared by the Parliamentary Library, is it? The
Yes,
document.
Parliamentary Library and Statistics New Zealand.
Leave us sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is objection. Order. Look, a point of order is being dealt with, and it won't be dealt with that way. Chris Tremaine, supplementary question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. What economic conditions did the government inherit in 2008?
The right
Speaker, well, that is an excellent question, Mr Speaker. When the government came into office in late 2008, we inherited the following economic conditions. Inflation was 5.1%. Mortgage interest rates were 10.5%. Food prices had gone up 11%. The economy had gone backwards for 4 quarters in a row. Treasury were forecasting deficits and debt was meant to go to 60% of GDP and never come back down again. That was the going away present that Labor delivered an incoming national government. I'm proud to have led a government that has turned that situation around.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, when the Prime Minister promised New Zealanders an aggressive recovery and that the country would come roaring out of recession, Did he mean that 3 years later he would be muddling through and growth would be crawling along at 0.1%, well below the rate of population growth?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Again, Mr Speaker, I didn't say roaring, so the member really, if he wants to quote me, should go and get the facts and read them out properly, as well as the full quote, as he knows well. But relatively speaking, Mr Speaker, we're actually doing pretty well. Not as well as we'd like. Of course, we'd like to do better. I'm actually reasonably confident, actually, for Q3 and 4 growth.
The Honourable John Biscown.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Supplementary to the Prime Minister, has he seen the IMF World Economic Outlook report projecting New Zealand's real GDP per growth between 2006 and 2016 at just 0.8% per annum? And if so, rather than muddling through, is he prepared to reconsider his decision to shelve the last two 2025 reports, which outlined a plan for New Zealand to boost its growth?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Yes. Yes, I'll keep myself out of trouble. Mr Speaker, no, I haven't seen that report. But what I would say, Mr Speaker, is let's have a little bit of context about the last 3 years at least. We've had a global financial crisis, which has affected, well, if David Cunliffe really thinks that New Zealand can be the only country that would be immune in the entire world from the global financial crisis, then I think Camp David 1 should swap over to Camp David 2, because he's clearly not demonstrating any form of leadership, Mr Speaker. Secondly, if one looks at the earthquakes and the economic impact of those, which have been enormous on the New Zealand economy, and then within that context look at what's happening in New Zealand, I think we can take a view that says we are starting to do better and improving within that environment. We are going to get we have grown for 8 of the last 9 quarters. We'll be back in surplus by 2014-15. Our debt is a quarter of the OECD average. We have interest rates at a 45-year low. Unemployment is starting to fall. We've created 45,000 jobs, and I think in the context of that environment, it's not too bad.
The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Why is the Prime Minister content to roar about the success of the Rugby World Cup and the record dairy payout outside the chamber, but barely able to squeak about the performance of his government because it's all someone else's fault, like the global recession or previous governments when he gets into the chamber?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr Speaker, I was actually slightly conscious that I was roaring inside the chamber, but for the purposes of let's go through it one more time. We've grown 8 out of the last 9 quarters, not bad. We've got interest rates at a 45-year low, not bad. Unemployment starting to fall, not too bad. We're likely to create 170,000 jobs in the next 4 years. We've reformed the RMA. And by the way, we're on track to win the Rugby World Cup.
Order. It's enough. The Honourable David Cunliffe.
Mr Speaker, it was a little difficult.
Order. Now look, the House will come to order. It's had its fun. It'll come to order. The member was
It was a little difficult to hear, Mr Speaker.
Order. Thank the Honourable Member. I just want the House to settle down for a moment. Now, it's a point of order the member wishes to raise. The Honourable David Cunliffe, point of order.
Mr Speaker, it was a little difficult to hear with that background noise, but I was wondering if I heard the Prime Minister say when he was going to return to surplus.
Order.
Not having done one yet.
That is not a point of order. The member knows that. The member knows that. Does the member, John Biscown, the Honourable John Biscown, supplementary question.
Supplementary to the Prime Minister. Does he consider it satisfactory that the International Monetary Fund are projecting a lower 10-year growth rate for New Zealand than 148 other countries, all of whom have been affected by the global financial crisis, including Australia at 1.6% per annum and Singapore at 2.6% per annum? If not, when can New Zealanders look forward to his government implementing the recommendations of the 2025 task force?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
About as soon as we look forward to decriminalising cannabis. Mr Speaker, I haven't seen that particular report, so I can't tell you that because the context of it would need to be seen. But what I can tell you is in the last 6 months, if you just look at the last 6 months as an example, we've grown at double the rate of the OECD average.
Order, Mr.
Point
Speaker.
of order, the Honourable John Biscoe.
Mr. Speaker, I seek leave to table a graph prepared...
Order, the House must settle down. The Honourable John Biscoe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I seek leave of the House to table a graph prepared by the International Monetary Fund showing projected growth rates over a 10-year period from 2006 to 2016, putting New Zealand at 148th slot.
Leave is sought to table that document. Is there any objection? There is no objection. Question number 5, Kevin Haig.